Good afternoon. My name is Mitsos. I'm a Greek journalist in newspaper Ta Nea. As Radik said before, I'm lucky enough to live in a country that will never be attacked by Russia, we hope.
Fingers crossed, yeah.
Yeah, fingers crossed. I'm also lucky to follow as a journalist several big names for me in order to understand what happens in the world. So, following passionately the war in Ukraine, I always, when I have questions, I try to find articles or, things by several people, not many of them. So in the United States, there are not many. I have in mind two. One is Anne. I mean, I'm following everything that Anne is writing in order to understand what's happening. And also to be courageous, because sometimes I lose my optimism. The other one is Timothy Snyder. He's somebody that I follow him as well. So being lucky enough to have Anne near me, I want to ask some questions that I really cannot sometimes answer myself. I understand why in the West a fascist supports Putin. There are fascists around us. Some people are fascists. What can you do? They support Putin, okay. I can understand somebody who is paid by the Russian propaganda that he supports Putin, that's his job. I mean, he's writing propaganda, he's saying things, he's saying fake news in order to support Putin. Otherwise, why somebody in the West support Putin? I just can't understand that.
So first of all, thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here, delighted to be following my husband. I don't think this exact order of events has occurred too many times before. But what you ask is a really interesting and important question, and it's related to another question, which is why do people who live in democracies find autocracy and authoritarianism appealing? Because they do. And we know that they do. And it's the idea that because we had an era of a widely accepted liberal democracy when the liberal democratic ideas seemed to be dominating in much of the world, because we were all lucky enough to live through that era, we imagined that it would be forever, and we forgot that we didn't disinvent the appeal of the strong man, the appeal of the dictator, and so on. And so part of your answer is related to that larger question. It's why do people who live in democracies that are sometimes chaotic, where things are difficult to solve, and where people emerge who promise to fix them instantly, let me get rid of this ridiculous Congress, or let me shut down the media, and then I can fix the problem. And why that remains appealing is something very deep in human nature. And when you have periods of chaos, but also just when you have periods of very, very rapid change, and one of which we're living through now, very rapid social change, demographic change, informational change, economic change, the way in which the internet even changed human relationships, how we talk to each other, how we understand the world, how we understand each other. When you're in an era of change like that, you almost always have an emergence of a drive to simplify things. There's too much cacophony, there's too much noise, there are too many conflicting opinions. Let's have someone come along and make sure that we all agree. And that's you can look back to the post-Civil War periods in multiple countries, and you see this desire, whether it's Napoleon arising after the French Revolution, you see it very often. So I think partly that's a part of the explanation. There is also a specific, deeper, longer story about Putin that is one that many countries have resisted telling for a long time, and that is that Putin has, for years now, been describing himself as a defender of traditional society and traditional values. And in doing so, has aligned himself with people in America, in Europe, I have no doubt here in Greece, but in Poland, in Germany, with people who have that same drive and who are following those same politics. And this is closely aligned to people who dislike the direction that the world is going. They blame liberal ideas, they blame liberal democracy, and they see in Putin someone who's offering an alternative, an end to this annoying feminist ideas, an end to the idea that transgender people should be treated equally, an end to gay marriage, an end to, to immigration and this, this change around our society. One of the great ironies of this is that Putin's Russia is a multi-ethnic state. And so the idea that Putin represents some kind of white Christian traditional society is, ridiculous on the face of it. But he has successfully sold that image of himself around the world, and in a way that I think has had real resonance. And I think it's so he has made himself the symbol of, anti-progressive, however, you use different language in different countries, but of a traditional society, return to the past, and nostalgia for a previous way of living. He's made himself the embodiment of that. And he has, and therefore has picked up, I think, some genuine followers in almost every society. As I said, it's a lie. Russia has very high divorce rates. You have it's very easy to get an abortion there. There's no evidence that it's a particularly religious society. People don't go to church there. I read a statistic, it may now be slightly out of date, but it may still reflect something, that a big Gallup survey was done. It turned out that less than 5% of Russians had ever read a Bible. This is not a religious society. Nevertheless, Putin has sold the image of himself as a believing traditional leader. And I think if you look at those two areas, you find part of the explanation. And in addition to that, you have to, maybe we'll talk about this further, you have to look at how Russia is spending its money in our societies too.
Would you give a similar answer if I ask you a similar question about President Trump, ex-President Trump? I'm so afraid of that I can't,
Actually, in the United States, we call our ex-presidents president. You still talk about President Clinton and President Obama.
In Greece as well, everybody is president, actually.
Yeah.
So if I ask you, an American of low education or an American who has a lot of money, I can understand that he votes for Trump. But why somebody else, another American, a woman, a woman of educated woman would vote, a black would vote for Trump? I can't understand it.
So you have to look again at a similar phenomenon. The wrong way to understand support for Trump is the way many people tried to portray it at the beginning of the first Trump administration in 2016. That it's about left behind groups of society, and it was about economics, and the poor were somehow voting for Trump. Actually, the poorest Americans voted for Hillary Clinton, and the poorest Americans voted for Joe Biden. So pure economics do not explain the support for Trump. Mm-hmm. And so, drop that idea right away. Mm-hmm. What does begin to explain...
The identity thing, then?
Sorry?
It's the identity thing, the identity politics?
He appeals to people. I think again, there's a complex of reasons, but it's a cultural argument, and it's not exactly the same as what Putin offers, but it's similar. It's a nostalgia for a different kind of America. There was an America in which there was a different social hierarchy, and white men were on top of it, and that goes on being, appealing to a certain kind of person, and there was a respect for parents, and there were traditional values, whatever it is that you imagine it was. If you actually look back at what the 1950s or 1960s were actually like, they weren't, of course, like what people remember. What people are remembering is Hollywood movies and American television programs. But he evokes nostalgia for a more orderly, more upright, more virtuous America, believe it or not, although he himself is not virtuous. And this, in that sense, is also parallel with, but in that Putin appeals to people as a white Christian leader, although he is not the leader of a white Christian nation. And Trump appeals to people who have this older idea of virtue, even though he himself has none of those qualities. And so I think that's the other piece of it. In America, like in every country, there's also tribalism around political parties. You know, I'm a Republican because my father was a Republican, and we believe this. All my friends are Republicans. You know, when you interview or you hear interviews with those few Republicans who've broken with Trumpism, you know, with Liz Cheney or Adam Kinzinger, these are members of the American Congress who wanted to impeach Trump or who rejected him. Almost all of them talk about this rejection of their friend circle. Mitt Romney has also spoken about this, Senator Romney, who voted for Trump's first impeachment. You know, it's not, you know, they're immediately rejected by everybody that they know. And in some cases, they have to get security and their lives are in danger. I mean, so it's you know, if you're part of a social group where everybody agrees about politics, to leave that means breaking with your friends. Some people find that very difficult. And so that's why in the United States it can be very hard for people to move parties.
Just to connect now the two topics, Ukraine and Trump. In a recent article, you wrote, quote, "This war the war in Ukraine will end either when the Russians win and replace the Ukrainian president with a puppet dictator, as they have wanted to do from the beginning, or when the Russians, like colonial powers of the past, decide that the price they are paying for this project has become too high and go home. Is there a third possibility? Trump being re-elected?" I remember yesterday, President Zelensky was asked by a CNN journalist, my colleague, about what President Trump, his plan of ending the war in one day. And the Ukrainian president answered quite carefully. He said, I don't know, I have not met him yet. When I meet with him, I will discuss with him his ideas.
So President Zelensky is not in a position to say that President Trump is wrong. He may well be dealing with him as a head of state. We're already dealing with him as a very important influence, you know, in American politics. So he's not going to attack President Trump in public. I wouldn't expect that. My understanding of, so I mean, if it's true, and I have heard different versions of the story, so be careful. If it's true that Trump imagines there is a deal to be done, I'm going to give Putin Donbass and Crimea, and in exchange, you know, the Ukrainian state will be allowed to survive. I don't know why anybody expects Putin would take that deal. Putin has not said that's what he wants. On the contrary, as Radek just reminded everybody, Putin has said repeatedly, he said it to Tucker Carlson, he said it to in various speeches, he said it in the article he wrote before the war, he said that his goal is to remove Ukraine as a nation. He doesn't want there to be a sovereign Ukrainian state. So I'm afraid that it is an illusion, you know, to imagine that there's a way to end the war with some kind of peace negotiation. I mean, unless Trump is threatening to nuke Putin, you know, or unless there's some piece of this story that I don't understand, then what I do understand is that what Trump is suggesting, if he means that the U.S. would stop arming Ukraine, then what he's suggesting is that Ukraine will cease to exist as a nation. I mean, I'm not saying that would happen, but that right now, I don't see this third outcome. I mean, in order to have a negotiation, you need two sides that want to negotiate. Right now, neither wants to. I can imagine a circumstance under which Ukraine was put under so much pressure they felt they had to negotiate. But why does anyone think Putin wants to negotiate? Because there isn't any evidence. I mean, the war is over when he leaves. So it is in his gift to end the war tomorrow. He could say right now, okay, I'm stopping here. I'm not going to take Avdiivka, or I'm not going to take Chasiv Yar, I'm not going to bomb Kharkiv, I'm not going to bomb Ukrainian cities, the war is over. He could say that right now. So since he doesn't say that, why do we think that just because Trump is president, he would say that? And I don't understand. There's a missing part of this logic that I'm not understanding.
So Radek talked a lot about that before, but you know, I had an argument with a professor, a friend of mine. He wrote in the newspaper an article saying that these calls by Josep Borrell and Charles Michel, etc., that Europe should prepare for war is a folly, he said. We cannot start spending on arms again in Europe. We cannot do this thing. Let's be realist. So what?
So unfortunately,
is it realism? What?
So no, but this is not realism. This is illusory. You know, this is imagining that we still live in a world where the most important concern for every world leader is the economic prosperity of his country. Putin is not a leader in that old 1980s, 1990s, 2000s, 2010 mold. He is not interested in the prosperity of his country. He is interested in his idea of personal glory. He's interested in recreating the Russian Empire. And he's also interested in destroying us. And by us, I mean all of you, you know, everyone in this room, the society.
European values.
European values. You know, this idea that there's a rule in Europe that we don't change borders by force, you know, these international law, the language that we use about human rights. He wants all of that to be gone. Partly because it's a threat to him personally. So what is the language that his own dissidents use? What do Russian Democrats talk about? They also talk about transparency and human rights and the rule of law. And the biggest challenge to him in his presidency has come from that kind of language. So he wants it eliminated. He wants to show that it doesn't work. It's a lie. Even us, we don't believe it. And one of the ways he's doing that is by engaging in a war in Ukraine in which he breaks every single conceivable piece of international law that you could break, from kidnapping children, from aiming at civilians, from, you know, to murdering prisoners of war. I mean, the whole thing, you know, every piece of international law you can think of, he has violated, and he's doing that on purpose. He wants to show that he doesn't care about these things. So it is illusory to imagine that there's a world in which he can continue to do that unstopped, and it's not going to affect us. I mean, maybe if you're lucky and you live in, you know, Portugal, you know, it'll be so far away you won't notice. But you will notice in a lot of other places, and you will notice not just militarily. You will notice in terms of economics. You will notice in terms of politics. You know, Putin has had, you know, and I don't want to sound conspiratorial because it's a. You know, these are open programs, and they say these things publicly. But Putin has had for 15 years an idea that he would, you know, he would like to undermine the European Union. He would like to destroy NATO. He would like the U.S. to leave Europe, and he's going to try and achieve those goals both through intimidation, but also through funding political parties and groups who advocate those things. Through internet campaigns, many of which we know about, many of which we don't. Radek actually mentioned RT, you know, these big official Russian television stations. I actually think those are not so important. I mean, you know, at least we more or less know what they are. Their readership is not, I mean, their viewership is not so high. But the Russians also do other things. They have a program of information laundering. You know, there's a lot of Russian information and propaganda and content that appears in other forms. In other, you know, you don't know exactly what newspaper you're looking at, but it looks like it's written by somebody who's a French person in France, but really it's not. The content comes from something else. I've actually just written about this. You can read about it in the Atlantic in about 3 weeks when the new issue comes out. But so they, you know, and this has been their program to change Western political arguments, you know, to assist the far left and the far right, and to change European politics so that it's more amenable to them. And they've been saying that openly and doing it openly for a decade. And we have chosen to not take it seriously because, you know, we can't imagine that it would matter, because we think our systems are so strong, because, you know, it's very conspiratorial to talk about outside influence. You know, we just don't care. You know, I was part of a group that worked on not the most recent Bundestag election, but the previous one. We did a kind of project with a team of data analysts, and we analyzed Russian influence and Russian narratives, you know, on the German election campaign. This is one of the first campaigns where the AfD were starting to do well, and they're of course quite closely connected. And we wrote this report, you know, and we took it around Germany, and we took it to, you know, to people in Berlin, and we did a presentation about it, and we could not get anybody to be interested in it. I mean, no one cared. And they were so confident that their own media was so strong and their own political system was so strong that it could not matter. And now where are we now? The AfD has, what is it, 14%, something like that in the Bundestag. And you have some states in East Germany that will be majority AfD.
Majority.
Right, so they wouldn't take it seriously, and maybe they're starting to now. And I fear that's the same in a lot of places. We are very complacent. We all of us here lived through this extraordinary period when liberal democracy was I'm repeating myself now, was the most important set of ideas in the world. I mean, Francis Fukuyama in that sense was right. This was an era of respect and belief in those ideas, and that era is now ending. And we need to readjust our thinking for the next era.
Sometimes I have the feeling that democracy is too naive, too open, too honest towards autocracy, and that's a problem.
It doesn't have to be naive.
Yeah.
We are naive because that's how we were all brought up, but we don't need to be naive. There can be, tough liberalism. There can be,
Tough liberalism is.
Yeah,
is a good expression.
Yeah,
I will use it.
We can be, and there's realistic liberalism. We have been living in a kind of illusion, and in fact, some of the worst people, the people who still live in this other past era, are these people who call themselves realists. No, the realism is to see how the world has changed and how we need to adjust along with it.
Let me take you briefly to the other war taking place, and referring to your. I'm always thinking of this article of yours, the title of the article that was viral, "The Bad Guys Are Winning." And I think you are preparing a book, actually.
Coming out in July. It's called Autocracy, Inc.
Autocracy. Yeah, exactly. So let me take you to the Middle East. 7th of October, a shock, a terrorist attack. Everybody is pro-Israeli. It doesn't matter if you have other feelings, other thoughts. You are pro-Israeli because Israel is having an attack on its territory. Flags, Israeli flags on the social media, etc. Some people, cynics, they say, don't rush. Wait to see how Israel will react. 6 months later, we have 35,000 Palestinians dead, most of them women and children. Netanyahu not showing any restraint or any strategic idea. Is there any possibility that the bad guys will win again? That Hamas will win or Netanyahu?
So first of all, I don't see the Middle Eastern conflict as falling into some kind of easy autocracy versus democracy binary. That doesn't seem to me like. I do think Ukraine and Russia do fall into that. I don't think it's a difficult conflict to understand morally or ideologically. I think Israel is much more complicated. It was one of the things I worried about from the moment the war began was that Netanyahu, who is, I think, profoundly corrupt in many different ways, and is somebody who he's exactly one of the people who has looked at Putin and Viktor Orban as role models and maybe even has influenced them. He's somebody who's, before October the 7th, the main and most important story in Israel was Netanyahu's attempt to dismantle his own judiciary. And so one of the things I worried about from the beginning was that Netanyahu would, first of all, overdo it the way the United States did after 9/11, and would, second of all, seek to use the war to stay in power. And lo and behold, that is what has happened. I think that you're already beginning now to see protests in the Israeli public, which you would have once thought would be unthinkable during a war in Israel. Israel famously would unite, in wartime and unite around conflicts, and yet you've had once again hundreds of thousands of Israelis protesting against Netanyahu and against a war that seems to have no clear goal. Again, I can imagine how if Russia left Ukraine tomorrow, then the war is over. That's it. If Israel were to leave Gaza tomorrow, it's not over. Then what happens after that? What's the bigger long-term plan for the Palestinians? I don't hear it from Netanyahu or the people around him, particularly not this small political parties, extremist parties that are keeping him in power. And so I don't see right now. I'm not hearing an outcome that leads to permanent peace. I don't want to imply that the only fault in this story is Israeli. Iran provoked, Iran funded and created Hamas. Hamas may have had some kinds of Russian help as well. We know that Hamas traveled, people traveled to Moscow both before and after the attack. We know, for example, that, I mean, that when we were just talking about Russia and social media, the Russians immediately after the October the 7th began both putting out anti-Israeli messaging and very divisive sort of anti-Semitic messaging as well. So they were trying to play into this divisive game themselves. I mean, I'm not saying that's the most important issue here, but they did do that. You also have other Iranian, you have Hezbollah, you have the Houthis, you have other Iranian proxies in the region who are also have their own goals and are also interested in destabilizing the situation. So, in the Middle East, you have the influence not just of, in a way you have sort of Russia, you have Iran, you have China, which is not playing a particularly constructive role either. You can see how there are a lot of people interested in keeping this chaos going, and then you have Netanyahu for his own, reasons. But it's there are a lot of bad actors there, as you can identify in other parts of the world, who have an interest in things not ending well.
We heard yesterday actually, we read on Bloomberg, and we heard, I think President Biden said that Iran is preparing an attack to Israel. So
Iran has been preparing attacks on Israel for many years, and Israel has been preparing attacks on Iran for many years, and it could be that eventually happens. Of course, I hope not.
I have a million questions, but I see Simeon there protesting. So just a last one, but it will be provocative.
No.
And I will ask you in front of Radik. I mean, we had democracy, triumph of democracy in Poland just recently. And this government lost the municipal elections.
No,
and what happened?
No, it didn't lose the
municipal.
It
didn't lose?
No.
Okay.
No.
Because I thought that there was a mistake.
No. It was a somewhat mixed picture. It was a really nice day. Voting levels went down. There were a lot of things going on, but the current coalition government controls, I believe, all the major top 100 cities. And will control the majority of regional governments as well. Remember that it's a coalition. There are three parties, as opposed to Law and Justice, which is one party. And so you can look at Law and Justice, and this was the same outcome actually as the October election. Technically speaking, Law and Justice had the most votes, and they have the most seats in Parliament. But when you have the three pro-democracy parties together, they are larger, and they have a majority. And that is more or less what happened in the local elections. But it's true you had a drop in turnout. I mean, what happened in Poland in October, which, by the way, I didn't expect. I thought they had already locked up enough of the institutions that the election was unwinnable. But what happened in Poland is that you had this extraordinary turnout. You had 74%, 75% of people voting. In cities, it was 85%. I have a friend in Warsaw whose district had a 92% turnout, which is very high in any democracy. And the energy to end this, to prevent Poland from sliding into autocratic populism was really very strong. Obviously, in local elections, the issues are different. It wasn't an existential election about what direction our country goes. It was there were different issues in each region of Poland. But no, it was more or less the same result that we had in October.
I'm more optimistic than yesterday. And
Good.
I keep the tough liberalism. I like it very much.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.